What people are saying about Erika Kirk right now is shaking everything because this isn't just another headline. This is a moment that, according to reports and online discussions, could completely change how her entire story is seen. We're talking about a court situation, a custody battle, and claims that a legal ruling may have shifted things in a way nobody expected. Now, let's be clear. Details circulating online are still being debated. Not everything has been officially confirmed, but that hasn't stopped the reaction because once the words court ruling and custody enter the conversation, people pay attention, and right now they are paying very close attention. Some are saying this could be the moment everything finally came into the open. Others are warning this is being blown out of proportion. But here's what's making this different. It's not just the outcome people are talking about, it's what that outcome might mean. Because if even part of what's being claimed is accurate, then this isn't just about one decision. It's about everything leading up to it, every timeline, every statement, every moment that people are now going back and re-examining. And the number that keeps coming up, $2,000, a figure that has people asking serious questions about what's really happening behind the scenes. So what actually happened in court? What do the reports really say? And why does this feel like it's only the beginning? Stay with me, because once you start breaking this down, the story becomes a lot more intense than it first appears. To understand why this situation involving Erika Kirk is blowing up right now, you have to look at the image that existed before any of these court discussions ever surfaced. Because for a long time, everything about her public presence felt controlled, structured, carefully presented. From appearances to messaging, the narrative around her life, especially her family life, seemed clear and consistent to the audience watching from the outside. And when something is presented that consistently for that long, people stop questioning it, they accept it, they move on. But that's exactly why what's happening now feels so intense. Because when a story that stable suddenly gets tied to legal proceedings, especially something as serious as custody, it doesn't just create curiosity, it creates shock. Because custody cases aren't small, they aren't casual. They involve evidence, documentation, and decisions that carry real consequences. And that's what makes this moment different from everything that came before. Now here's where things start to get complicated. Because most of what's being discussed right now isn't coming from official press releases or direct public statements. It's coming from reports being circulated online, commentary from creators and analysts, fragments of legal discussion being interpreted by the public. And while some of those sources might contain pieces of truth, they don't always present the full picture. But that hasn't slowed anything down, because once legal terms start trending, words like custody, ruling, and payments, the conversation escalates immediately. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Now let's talk about the number that has people talking the most, $2,000. Because whether or not that figure is fully accurate, the idea of that amount tied to a legal situation instantly grabs attention. It signals seriousness. It signals impact. It makes people feel like something major has happened. But here's the key detail that often gets lost because numbers like that don't appear out of nowhere. They are usually connected to ongoing legal processes, situations that develop over time, cases that involve multiple steps before reaching any kind of conclusion. And that's important because it means what we're seeing now didn't happen overnight. Now add another layer to this because as soon as the idea of a court ruling started circulating, people didn't just focus on the present. They started looking backward, re-examining everything. Past statements, old clips, moments that once seemed normal. Suddenly, all of it started being viewed differently because once legal action enters the picture, it changes how people interpret everything else. And that's exactly what's happening here. Now here's where the emotional side comes in. Because situations involving custody aren't just legal, they are deeply personal. They involve family, relationships, and decisions that affect real lives. And when that kind of situation becomes public, the reaction becomes stronger, more personal, more divided, because people don't just watch. They form opinions. They take sides. They try to understand what's happening even when the full details aren't available. And that's what's fueling this story right now. Now let's talk about timing because this isn't happening in isolation. It's happening at a moment where audiences are already more skeptical than ever. People question narratives, they question public images, they question whether everything they've been shown is the full story. And when a legal situation appears in that environment, it amplifies everything. Because now the questions people already had feel like they might have a reason. Now here's the critical point because despite all the discussion, there is still no fully verified detailed public breakdown confirming every claim being made online. And that distinction matters a lot because there's a difference between what is being reported and what is actually confirmed in full detail. And right now, most of the conversation is happening in that gap between information and interpretation. But that gap, that's where stories grow the fastest because uncertainty keeps people watching, keeps them asking questions, keeps them coming back for updates. Now here's the biggest question that's starting to form. If this situation continues to develop, what happens next? Because custody cases don't just end with one moment, they evolve. they move through stages. And each stage can bring new information, new details, new perspectives, which means what we're seeing right now might not be the full story, it might just be the beginning. And that's exactly why people can't look away. Because when legal, personal, and public narratives collide like this, the outcome doesn't just affect one moment, it reshapes everything that came before it. The moment the words court ruling and custody started trending together, that's when everything around Erika Kirk changed. Because now this wasn't just speculation anymore. It felt official. It felt real. And once something feels real, even before every detail is confirmed, the reaction becomes immediate, fast, emotional, and impossible to control. According to circulating reports, a legal decision may have shifted custody dynamics in a way that nobody expected. Again, full verified documents haven't been publicly broken down in detail. But the idea alone, that was enough because once people heard that a court might have ruled against her, everything escalated. Now the conversation wasn't just about what's happening today, it became about everything leading up to this moment, and that's where the real conflict begins because you now have two completely different narratives colliding. On one side, the public image, a story that had been presented consistently for years, one that people had accepted without question. But on the other side, a growing wave of reports suggesting that something behind the scenes may not have aligned with that image. And when those two versions collide, that's when people start asking questions, a lot of them. Now here's where things get intense because once the custody discussion started spreading, people didn't stop there. They started digging, looking for anything that might explain how things reached this point. Old interviews, past statements, moments that once seemed normal, now being reanalyzed from a completely different perspective. And that's when smaller details started getting attention. Things that might not mean anything on their own, but when placed together start to feel connected. And that's how narratives build, not from one big revelation, but from multiple smaller observations that people piece together. Now here's the first twist, because despite how intense the conversation became, there is still no single fully detailed public document that confirms every version of the story being shared online. Which creates a strange situation because normally when something is this serious, there's clarity, there's confirmation, there's something concrete that settles the conversation. But here there isn't, at least not completely. And that changes everything because now the story isn't being driven purely by facts, it's being driven by interpretation, by what people think might be happening. And that's where things get complicated. Now here's the second layer of conflict because not everyone is reacting the same way. Some people are convinced that this is a turning point, that the report signals something major has already happened behind the scenes. They see the number $2,000. They see the custody angle, and they believe this is only the beginning of something bigger. But others, they are pushing back hard, questioning the accuracy of what's being shared, pointing out that legal cases are complex, that partial information can be misleading, that jumping to conclusions without full context can create a false narrative. And just like that, the story becomes bigger than the claims themselves. It becomes a debate about truth, about credibility, about how people interpret incomplete information. Now, here's where things take another turn. Because while all of this is happening publicly, there's another question starting to emerge underneath it all. Timing. Why now? Why is this information surfacing at this moment? Because legal processes don't happen instantly. They take time. They move through stages, which means if something significant has happened, it likely didn't start recently. It's been developing behind the scenes for a while. And that realization, it changes how people look at everything. Because now the question isn't just what happened in court, it becomes what was happening before we even knew about it. And that's where the tension really builds. Because once people start thinking like that, they don't just focus on the outcome. They focus on the buildup, trying to understand how everything led to this point. Now here's the biggest twist of all. Because despite all the noise, all the speculation, all the reactions, we still don't have a clear, fully verified picture of the entire situation. Which means we're in a very specific kind of moment, a moment where the story is still forming, still evolving, still capable of shifting in any direction. And that's what makes it so unpredictable. Because if more verified details come out, the entire narrative could change instantly. It could confirm what people are saying or completely challenge it. But until that happens, everything we are seeing right now is part of the buildup, the tension, the anticipation. Because stories like this don't just end quietly, they build towards something, a reveal, a statement, a moment where everything becomes clearer. And right now, we haven't reached that moment yet. But something tells me we're getting closer. Just when it seemed like the situation around Erika Kirk couldn't get any more intense, it did because the conversation didn't slow down. It multiplied every hour. New clips started resurfacing. Old interviews, past statements, moments that once felt ordinary, now being analyzed like evidence. And that's when everything escalated to another level because people weren't just reacting anymore. They were investigating, connecting timelines, comparing what was said then to what's being reported now. And once that shift happens, the story takes on a completely different energy. Now here's where the shocking reveal hits, but not in the way most people expect. Because the biggest reveal isn't just about the custody situation. It's about how many small details when viewed together start to feel like they tell a bigger story. Individually, each detail might not prove anything, but collectively, they create a narrative people can't ignore. Now again, this is where things must be kept clear. Most of these connections are based on interpretation, not fully verified documentation. But that hasn't stopped the momentum because once a story reaches this level of attention, it becomes self-sustaining. People keep sharing it, keep discussing it, keep adding their own perspectives. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Now here's where things take another turn because the focus has started shifting. At first it was all about what happened in court, but now it's becoming, what does this mean about everything before this? And that shift is powerful because it turns one moment into a full narrative. Now people aren't just looking at the outcome, they are looking at the buildup, trying to understand how things may have reached this point. And that's where the tension really increases. Because when people start reevaluating the past, they don't stop easily. Every detail becomes important. Every moment becomes part of the story. And that's what's driving this escalation. Now here's the part that changes everything. Because the number $2,000 has taken on a life of its own. Whether it's fully confirmed or not, it represents something bigger. It represents impact, consequences, a shift that feels significant. And once a number like that enters the conversation, it amplifies everything because people associate it with seriousness, with legal weight, with something that goes beyond rumor. Now add in the custody angle because that introduces a whole new level of intensity. This isn't just about reputation anymore. It's about family, real-life decisions, outcomes that affect people directly. And that makes the story more emotional, more personal, more divisive, because people don't just analyze it, they feel it. Now here's where the real turning point happens. Because once the conversation reached this level, it stopped being about one specific claim and started becoming about perception, how people view the situation, how they interpret incomplete information, and how quickly narratives can form when clarity is missing. And that's the shocking part because even without full confirmation, the impact is already happening. The story is already influencing how people think, how they talk about it, how they engage with it. And that's powerful. Now imagine what happens if more information comes out. A detailed report, a clear statement, verified documents that explain everything. That's when everything shifts instantly because at that point, the story moves from speculation to confirmation. And when that happens, it doesn't just trend, it explodes. But here's the key detail. We're not there yet. Right now, we're in the middle, in the buildup, in the phase where everything is still uncertain. And that uncertainty, that's what keeps people watching, keeps them engaged, keeps them waiting for what comes next. Now here's the biggest question of all. What happens next? Because stories like this don't stay in this phase forever. They move. They evolve. They reach a point where something has to happen. Either new verified information appears, or the conversation shifts into something else entirely. But either way, it doesn't stay the same. And that's why this moment matters, because we're at that turning point, where the next development, whatever it is, will determine everything. And if the momentum continues the way it has so far, something tells me this story isn't done yet, not even close. The moment this story around Erika Kirk started trending, it didn't just stay in one corner of the internet, it exploded. Because now it wasn't just about a possible court situation anymore. It became a full-scale public debate, and just like that, the internet split into sides. On one side, you had people who believed something major had already happened behind the scenes. They pointed to the custody angle. They pointed to the reported financial impact. They pointed to how fast the conversation was growing. And their reaction was simple. This isn't random. This doesn't happen without a reason for them. This moment felt like a turning point, a situation where everything people thought they knew was now being questioned. But on the other side, the pushback was just as strong because many people immediately started calling for caution, pointing out that legal cases are complex, that partial information can be misleading, that not everything trending online reflects the full truth, and their message was clear. Wait for confirmation. Don't jump to conclusions. This is how narratives spiral. And just like that, the conversation became bigger than the story itself. Because now it wasn't just about what happened, it was about how people interpret what's happening. Now here is where things get even more interesting. Because this wasn't just a fan reaction. Content creators, commentators, and media voices all started engaging with it too. But instead of taking strong positions, most of them became careful, measured using phrases like reports suggest unconfirmed details, developing situation because everyone understands one thing. This kind of story can escalate quickly, and once it does, it's hard to control where it goes. Now, here's the part that really stands out because even people who weren't directly involved in the situation started getting pulled into the conversation indirectly. Old clips resurfaced. Past appearances were re-examined. Moments that had nothing to do with the current situation suddenly being connected to it. And that's how stories like this grow. They expand, they branch out, they become something bigger than their original starting point. Now, here's the key shift happening right now, because beyond the arguments, there's a growing awareness. People are starting to recognize that not everything being shared has been fully verified, and that awareness is changing how some are engaging. Some are stepping back, waiting, choosing to hold judgment until more details come out. Others, they are still fully involved, still analyzing, still debating every new piece of information. And that split, that's what keeps the story alive. Because disagreement creates engagement, and engagement keeps attention locked in. Now here's the industry angle. Because situations like this don't just impact individuals, they impact perception, public trust, how audiences view information in general. Because when legal topics become part of public conversation, it raises bigger questions about transparency, about accountability, about how stories are presented. And those questions don't just apply here, they apply everywhere. Now here's the most important detail of all. Because despite all the reactions, all the debates, all the speculation, we still don't have a fully verified, detailed breakdown of everything being claimed. No complete public documentation confirming every aspect of the story, just ongoing discussion. And that's what makes this moment so powerful, because we're not reacting to a closed case. We're reacting to something that is still developing, still evolving, still open. And that means anything could happen next. A confirmation, a clarification, a shift in the narrative that changes everything or nothing at all, which would turn this into something else entirely. A moment where speculation drove attention more than facts. And that's why people can't look away. Because until something definitive happens, the story stays alive. And whatever comes next could change everything. Just when it feels like this story around Erika Kirk has reached its peak, that's when the real twist hits. Because the biggest shift isn't just about the reported custody situation or the number people keep repeating. It's about how the entire narrative has changed right in front of everyone. Because at this point, something unusual has happened. The story has split into two completely different versions. One version is based on what can actually be confirmed: general reports of legal proceedings, public appearances, and statements that exist on record. The other version is built on interpretation, on people connecting dots, on details that feel inconsistent when viewed side by side. And right now, both versions are moving at the same time, which creates tension because people are forced to choose what they believe. Now here's where the twist gets deeper. Because the longer a situation like this goes without a clear, detailed public explanation, the stronger the speculation becomes. Because when there's no resolution, people fill in the blanks themselves. And once that happens, the story becomes less about facts and more about perception. And perception spreads fast. Now here's the part that changes everything. Because we're reaching a point where something has to happen next. Either new verified information comes out, something concrete that explains exactly what happened, what the court decided, and what it means moving forward. Or the story shifts completely from being about one specific case to becoming a broader example of how fast narratives can grow when details are unclear. And both outcomes matter, because if something is confirmed, everything changes instantly. The confusion disappears. The story becomes clear. But if nothing is clarified, then this moment becomes something else entirely. A situation where attention, speculation, and partial information created a narrative that took on a life of its own. Now here's the biggest cliffhanger of all. Because right now we don't know which direction this is going. We're in the middle, watching it unfold in real time, waiting for something, anything that brings clarity, because one official statement, one verified document, one clear explanation could flip everything overnight. And that's why people are still watching, still refreshing, still looking for updates. Because stories like this don't just fade away. They build, they escalate, they reach a moment where everything becomes clear. And something tells me we haven't reached that moment yet. So now the real question isn't what are people saying, it's this: what actually happened and what's going to be revealed next? Because when that answer finally comes out, it won't just end the story, it will define it. Now, I want to hear from you, because this situation involving Erika Kirk isn't just another trending story. It's one of those moments where the internet is trying to figure out what's real and what's just speculation. So, be honest in the comments. White pointing backhand index. Do you think something major actually happened behind the scenes, or is this being blown out of proportion online? White right pointing backhand index. How do you personally decide what to believe when details are still unclear? White right pointing backhand index. And do you think more verified information is going to come out, or will this stay a mystery? Because right now the conversation is louder than the confirmed facts. Some people are convinced this is just the beginning of something much bigger. Others believe this is exactly how rumors take over when there isn't enough clear information. And until something is officially clarified, both sides are going to keep going. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because if anything new does come out, we're going to break it down immediately with what's actually verified and what it really means. No hype, just clarity. And trust me, If this story continues to build the way it has so far, the next update might be the one that changes everything. So stay locked in because this isn't over yet.